Hi everyone, Dr. Hadaway here from Indian Creek Dental. Today I'm going to talk to you a little bit about how we make temporary or transitional crowns. The difference between a temporary and a transitional crown is one of semantics. Sometimes we put a little bit more effort into our transitional crowns because the patient will be wearing them for an extended period of time. We will have a tooth that we can actually work with, and so we will take a preform of the tooth before we start working. We use a material that is a plastic that we heat up, and we will form it. We will press it over the tooth to create a negative space preform. Once that preform is made, I will use a plastic material, which is a resin, and I will inject it into the negative preform space, and in just a minute you'll see how that's done. It's pretty easy to make a preform when we have a tooth to work with, or if the tooth has already been built up. But sometimes we have to work with a tooth that has been broken off at the gum line, and when that happens, I use a material that is, it's basically a very liquidy form of plastic. Once it gets exposed to light, it starts to turn hard. Sometimes I also use red wax, and I will put it in place and press the preform over it. So one of the reasons that we have crowns is it is an alternative to large restorations that tend to be unpredictable once they reach a certain percentage of the size of the tooth. Sometimes when the cusp of a tooth becomes undermined by decay or a fracture, the possibility of that fracture going further down the root is really high, so we have to provide basically a cap that goes over the whole thing to protect the internal structure. We prepare a tooth for a crown. After we remove the decay or the fracture, we build the tooth back up, and then we prepare the tooth about 1 millimeter all the way around. 1 millimeter is just a very small amount. This right here is 3 millimeters. Right there is 1 millimeter. So you can tell we're dealing with a very, very small amount of tooth structure removal. The tooth will have about 1 millimeter to 1.5 millimeters shaved around it, and typically the crown will be replacing the enamel. Underneath the enamel we have something softer called dentin. Transitional and temporary crowns are used to, one, hold the space of the tooth, because if you have a tooth that is not in contact with anything, it has the opportunity to drift around. Two is to give the tooth a little bit of protection to the oral environment. And three is to see how the tooth heals up. If you go straight from having the tooth being prepared to the final crown, sometimes the final crown we won't be able to do as much troubleshooting, and we'll have to cut the permanent crown you have off, basically redo all the work, and then put a new final crown back on. So this is what a tooth that is prepared for a crown looks like. This right here is actually the final all zirconia crown. In this instance, I'm going to use these final all zirconia crowns as our preforms, and I'm going to make a new transitional crown to allow extra time for the gum tissue to heal up. Sometimes when we have temporary crowns, they aren't as smooth as the final restorations, and the gums respond pretty reactively to them. It's not a very favorable reaction. It's a severe gingivitis that can cause a lot of discomfort, and so what I do in my office is fabricate a new transitional crown that it takes a little bit more time, but it helps us troubleshoot, is this gum related or is this tooth related? It also helps to increase the health of the gums around it, so when we do our final restoration, I don't have to deal with a whole lot of blood, and we can have a better seal on the final product. So we heat it up so it's malleable like this, and then we press it over the teeth to create a preform with negative space that we will then fill with our plastic temporary material. These are the first temporary crowns that we had in place. We actually had them splinted because our patient was leaving town. When we splint the crowns together, you're unable to floss between them. Splinting the crowns is a way that we get increased retention, so the possibility of these falling off is much less likely than if they were two individual crowns like that. In addition to having these crowns splinted, we also sent the patient with a no-mix temporary cement that she could have used on her own. And we can show pictures of that. That is a negative space representation of where we want the teeth to be. I will fill up this space with our plastic temping material and put it over the area, so it goes over just like this. So here's our preform, here's our material. I'm going to inject it into our preform. And then I'm going to press it over the teeth. The material takes about 5 minutes to set up, and as it sets up, it goes through a rubbery phase. When it's about 25% set up, I usually take it out of the mouth and let it get to its final state. That's hard like a piece of plastic. So here I have a preformed version of the crowns, and I'm going to start to separate them with my hand tools. So after I've cut all the excess away, we have these nice crowns that are made out of plastic that I can easily adjust. And it can give me a lot of information. It can allow our patients more time for the gum tissues to heal up. I usually use inside here a transitional cement or a temporary cement that makes the crown easier to retrieve. The cement does very well with compressive forces. Those are the forces that we bite with, but it doesn't do very good with the forces that pull up. So that's why I always tell people, when you're flossing, you pull down and you go to the side. You avoid sticky foods. So oftentimes we will have you bite on what we call articulating paper. It's this stuff that creates these blue marks, so we know where you are closing down on the temporary crown. We typically want to see the spots to be light and to be usually right in a tripod. So this is, we have a spot here, here, and here.